The air inside the hangar was cold, the kind of metallic chill that clung to steel beams and polished floors. Rows of fighter jets loomed in silence, their sleek bodies reflecting the harsh overhead lights. Men and women in uniform moved briskly, some with clipboards, others with tools, but all with one eye drawn to the center of the storm. Admiral Harris stood with his hands clasped behind his back, boots planted like anchors, his presence commanding attention without effort. His square jaw was tight, his gray eyes sharp as blades, fixed on the figure standing before him. Captain Elise Ward, once one of the Air Force's brightest pilots, stood at attention, helmet tucked under her arm. Her posture was perfect, but her eyes betrayed nothing. No flicker of fear, no sign of apology. She waited for the hammer to fall, her silence daring the man in front of her to make his judgment. "You disobeyed a direct order," the Admiral's voice cut across the hangar, echoing through steel and silence. Mechanics stopped turning wrenches. Young cadets froze mid-step. Everyone within earshot had heard stories of Ward, some whispered. In awe, others with contempt. Elise did not flinch. "Yes, sir," she said evenly. "Do you have any idea what that means?" Harris barked. His chest rose and fell with the kind of anger that comes less from fury and more from disappointment. "It means I put lives above protocol," she replied, her tone calm but firm. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. No one ever spoke back to Admiral Harris, not like that. He stepped closer, his towering frame designed to intimidate, but Elise held her ground. "This is not your decision to make, Captain." Harris snapped. "The chain of command exists for a reason. You are not above it." Her jaw tightened, but her gaze remained steady. And what if the chain of command is too slow? What if waiting for clearance means body bags instead of survivors? The Admiral's nostrils flared. For a moment, it seemed he might erupt. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and turned to the group gathering at the edges of the hangar. "This pilot," he announced loudly, gesturing toward her, "is relieved of duty. Effective immediately. Remove her clearance and escort her off this base." Gasps broke through the crowd. Elise's chest rose slowly, her breathing steady. She did not protest. She did not plead. Instead, she snapped a salute, sharp as the crack of thunder, then turned on her heel. The sound of her boots against the concrete floor echoed like drumbeats of finality. As she walked, whispers followed her. "Did you hear? She flew over Kandahar. They say she went rogue. Saved a whole platoon. No, she endangered everyone. Shadow pilot. That's what they called her." Elise heard it all, but her face remained unreadable. The truth was buried too deep, sealed in classified files and the memories of men who rarely spoke of. What they'd seen. At the hangar doors, she paused. The bright afternoon sunlight streamed in, silhouetting her figure as though she belonged to another world entirely. With her helmet tucked against her ribs, she turned back for one last look. At the rows of jets she had once commanded like extensions of her own body. The silence in the hangar was thick, heavy, as if even the steel walls themselves waited for her to say something. But Elise said nothing. The Admiral watched her go, his jaw rigid, but beneath his stern exterior was a trace of something else. Flicker of doubt. It was gone as quickly as it came, hidden under the weight of years in command. Outside, Elise strode across the tarmac toward the security gate. The heat rising off the asphalt shimmered, distorting her figure like a mirage. She felt the stares of younger pilots, the mixture of awe and confusion painted across their faces. Some looked at her as a traitor, others as a legend. She didn't care what they thought. Every step she took carried the memory of choices, split-second decisions made thousands of feet above ground, where hesitation meant death. She had learned to live with the consequences. The problem was, command had not. At the gate, A young airman stood stiffly, waiting to scan her ID one last time. His hands shook slightly as he fumbled with the device. Elise noticed, but said nothing. Instead, she offered a faint smile, one that carried more sadness than warmth. "Ma'am," the airman stammered, I don't understand." "Why would?" Because sometimes the truth doesn't fit the report," she interrupted softly. The words puzzled him, but he scanned her badge and handed it back without further question. She took it, clipped it back to her uniform, and turned toward the parking lot. Behind her, the hangar buzzed with murmurs. Some of the men and women inside still stared at the Admiral, waiting for an explanation, but Harris offered none. He simply turned, his boots striking hard against the floor, and disappeared into his office. Yet even as he walked away, his mind replayed the scene over and over. There had been no fear in her eyes, no arrogance either, just conviction. It was the kind of conviction he had seen only in men who had nothing left to lose, or in soldiers who had seen too much. And that was what unsettled him most. Elise reached her car, set her helmet on the hood, and leaned against the door. For the first time since the confrontation, she allowed herself a deep breath. The anger, the humiliation, the dismissal, it all stung. But none of it compared to the weight of silence she had carried for years. They thought they knew her. They thought she was reckless, insubordinate, uncontrollable. They had no idea. In her mind, she was back in the cockpit, the roar of the F-22's engines vibrating through her bones. The black desert sky stretched endless above her. She saw the flashes of tracer fire, the desperate calls of soldiers trapped below, the decision to break orders because the alternative was unthinkable. She closed her eyes. They could strip her of her clearance, her base access, her uniform. But they could never take away what she had done, nor the men who still breathed because she had chosen differently. The Admiral's voice still echoed in her ears. "You are relieved of duty." Maybe, but Elise Ward knew better. This was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning. The sun dipped low over the runway, painting the horizon in bands of copper and crimson. Heat shimmered off the tarmac, distorting the line of aircraft that stood like watchful sentinels against the desert sky. Captain Elise Ward adjusted the strap of her helmet under her arm as she approached the outer gate. Every step echoed with finality. She was leaving this base, not as a decorated pilot, not as an officer, but as a dismissed soldier, stripped of duty by the Admiral's word. Around her, eyes followed. Young airmen, mechanics, and even seasoned officers glanced at her with a cocktail of curiosity, pity, and quiet awe. She ignored them all. At the guard post, 2 Navy SEALs leaned against a Humvee, their silhouettes sharp against the fading light. They were off-duty, clad in fatigues rather than combat gear, but there was no mistaking their presence. SEALs carried themselves differently, like coiled springs, ready for action at a moment's notice. The taller of the 2, with a weathered face and sun-scorched skin, straightened as Elise approached. He squinted, studying her with the careful intensity of someone trying to place a memory. His partner noticed too, his casual posture tightening into alertness. "Captain Ward," the gate sergeant said, breaking the silence. "I'll need your final sign-off." Elise unclipped her radio, pressed the button, and spoke into the receiver. Her voice was calm, deliberate, yet carrying a weight that rolled across the tarmac. "Raptor Shadow, signing off." The effect was immediate. The taller SEAL snapped upright, his expression transforming from suspicion to recognition. Without hesitation, his hand rose in a crisp salute, the kind reserved only for the rarest kind of respect. His partner followed instantly, his salute just as sharp, his eyes locked on her with something between reverence and disbelief. The sergeant froze mid-motion, blinking in confusion. Wait, what did you just say? Elise didn't answer. She lowered the radio, clipped it back to her belt, and simply returned the SEAL's salutes with quiet precision. Her face betrayed nothing, but in her chest, her heart thudded like the afterburners of a jet. From the hangar behind them, Admiral Harris had stepped outside, intending to ensure his orders were being carried out. He stopped dead in his tracks. Across the tarmac, he saw two of his most hardened SEALs men, who answered to no one, lightly standing at attention before Elise. Ward, their salutes unwavering. For a heartbeat, Harris thought he was seeing things. Then, as if a signal had passed through invisible wires, more SEALs emerging from the barracks began to notice. One by one, they halted. Their eyes locked onto her, recognition dawning. And then salutes rose, synchronized and solemn. It was surreal. An entire unit of elite warriors, men trained to question nothing and respect few, stood rigid in respect to a single Air Force pilot. No orders had been given, no words exchanged. It was instinct. The Admiral's chest tightened. What the hell is going on? He muttered under his breath. The whispers spread like wildfire to the ranks of those watching from the fence. Line. Did you hear what she called herself? Raptor Shadow. That can't be her. No way. That's the one from Helmand. The story wasn't a myth? The Admiral turned sharply to his aide, a young lieutenant who looked as bewildered as the rest. Lieutenant, why are my SEALs saluting her? The aide swallowed hard. Sir, I think they know her call sign. Her call sign? Harris repeated, his voice dripping with incredulity. That's what this is about? A nickname? But even as he said it, he knew better. In the military, a call sign wasn't just a nickname. It was identity, reputation. Sometimes it was legend. And judging by the reaction of his men, Elise Ward's call sign carried more than just weight, it carried history. Elise remained silent through it all. She didn't acknowledge the growing crowd of salutes, nor did she look back at the Admiral, watching from afar. She simply adjusted her grip on her helmet and stepped forward. Each SEAL she passed held their salute until she was beyond them, their faces stern but eyes alive with memory. To them, she wasn't the disgraced pilot Harris had just thrown off base. She was Raptor Shadow the Phantom, who had once shielded them from death in a foreign desert sky. The air was thick with unspoken words. Finally, the taller SEAL broke. A silence, his voice gravelly but steady. Ma'am, we never got the chance to thank you. Elise paused, her back to them, and for the first time since leaving the hangar, her voice softened. No thanks necessary. Just keep fighting. And then she walked on, the sunlight catching the edges of her uniform as she disappeared beyond the gate. Behind her, Admiral Harris stood frozen. His men, his warriors, had just saluted the pilot he had dismissed in disgrace. His authority felt suddenly fragile, his certainty shaken. That call sign, two simple words, had undone everything he thought. He knew about Elise Ward, Raptor Shadow. The name gnawed at him. He had heard whispers years ago, stories buried under classified stamps, tales dismissed as exaggerated legend. A rogue pilot who had flown missions no one else would dare attempt. A shadow in the sky who turned death into survival for soldiers pinned on the ground. But those were just stories. Weren't they? The Admiral clenched his fists. If Elise Ward truly was that pilot, then he hadn't just thrown an officer off his base. He had dishonored someone whose reputation was etched into the very bones of the men he commanded. He turned back toward the hangar, his steps sharp and fast. Get me everything you can on Captain Ward, he ordered his aide. Now. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the airfield, the Admiral's world began to tilt. For years, he had believed in control, in order, in the sanctity of command structure. But one call sign, spoken into the radio, had just shattered that foundation. And he couldn't shake the image of hardened SEALs saluting a pilot he thought unworthy. For the first time in years, Admiral Harris felt something he had almost forgotten: doubt. And doubt, he knew, was dangerous. Because if Elise Ward was truly who they believed she was, then the decision to cast her out had not just been a mistake. It had been a betrayal. The desert night was alive with chaos. Tracer rounds ripped across the sky, fiery streaks against the ink-black canvas of Helmand Province. Below, SEAL platoon crouched low in a dried riverbed, their backs pressed against Dirk Wall's enemy. Fire rained from the ridges above. The sound of gunfire was deafening, sharp bursts of AK-47s, the crack of machine guns, and the dull, terrifying thud of mortar hitting too close. Lieutenant Mason, the SEAL team leader, pressed his radio tight against his helmet. "We're pinned," requesting immediate air support. Coordinates locked. Repeat, "We are pinned." Static answered him, then a voice, calm, unshaken. "This is Raptor Shadow. Hold your position. I've got eyes on you." Mason's head snapped up. The men around him traded glances. They had heard the name before, whispered through channels, and rumors, but few had ever spoken directly to the pilot behind it. "Raptor Shadow, we're cut off. They've got RPGs on the ridges. If they close in, not on my watch," the voice cut in, steady, like iron in a storm. "Mark your position with IR. Keep your heads down." Far above, Captain Elise Ward angled her F-22 into a tight dive, the desert landscape spreading wide beneath her. Her HUD lit up with enemy signatures. At least 40 hostiles closing in on the trapped SEALs. The odds were ugly. But odds had never scared her. Her hands danced across the controls, muscle memory guiding her as the jet screamed through the night. She flipped her comms to private for a brief moment. "Disobeying orders again, Ward," she muttered to herself. "Let's hope it's worth it." Back at the base, Command had already denied her request to engage. "Too risky," they said. The SEALs were written off as lost. But Elise couldn't accept that. Not when she could still hear the panic in Mason's voice. Not when she knew she had the tools to change the outcome. The jet's engines roared as she dropped altitude, cutting through enemy fire like a phantom. To the men on the ground, she appeared out of nowhere, a streak of steel and shadow slicing across the moonlit sky. Raptor Shadow inbound, her voice filled Mason's headset again. "Light them up for me." A SEAL popped a flare, its infrared glow invisible to enemy eyes, but bright as a beacon on Elise's display. She locked the coordinates, thumb hovering over the trigger. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to still. Then she pressed down. The F-22 spat fire, precision-guided munitions slamming into the ridges with surgical accuracy. Explosions lit up the night, shockwaves rattling the earth below. Dust and smoke billowed as enemy positions disintegrated under her relentless assault. "Move!" Mason shouted, signaling his men forward as Elise strafed the hillside, forcing the enemy into retreat. But the danger wasn't over. A rocket-propelled grenade shot skyward, trailing smoke as it locked onto her jet. Elise yanked the stick, rolling hard, the missile streaking past by inches. Sweat beaded her brow, but her voice remained calm. "Over. Comes, still breathing. Keep moving east, I'll clear you a path." The SEALs sprinted through the dust, their boots pounding the earth as Elise circled back for another pass. Every time they were threatened, her jet was there, cutting down hostiles, scattering ambushes, carving a tunnel of survival through the chaos. Minutes stretched into an hour, and by the time the sun began to edge the horizon, the battle was over. The ridges were silent. Smoke curled upward from charred enemy positions, and the SEAL platoon, battered but alive, stumbled into an extraction zone where helicopters waited. Lieutenant Mason looked up as the F-22 banked overhead, its wings catching the dawn light. He pressed his radio one last time. "Raptor Shadow, we owe you our lives." Elise's voice crackled back, soft but resolute. "Just doing my job. Stay alive. That's thanks enough." Then she was gone, disappearing into the morning sky like a ghost. The story of that night spread faster than wildfire among the SEALs. At first, it was just whispered in after-action debriefs, a quiet acknowledgement of the pilot who had refused to abandon them. But as more missions unfolded, missions where her presence turned certain death into survival, the whispers became a legend. To the outside world, Elise Ward was a decorated but controversial pilot, reprimanded for defying orders one too many times. But to the SEALs, she was something else entirely. She was the shadow in the sky who appeared when all hope was gone. She was the unbreakable promise that someone was watching, someone who would never let them fall without a fight. The name Raptor Shadow carried weight. It wasn't written in official records or stamped in medals. It was carved into memory, carried in the hearts of warriors who knew what it meant to be abandoned and what it felt like to be saved. Every SEAL who had crossed her path remembered the sound of her jet screaming overhead, the calm steadiness of her voice in the worst moments of their lives. They remembered that when command wrote them off, she didn't. That was why, years later, when she spoke her call sign at the gate, every SEAL who heard it reacted the same way. Instinct, respect, gratitude that could never truly be repaid. And that was the legacy Admiral Harris had never known. Back on base, Harris sifted through reports, redacted lines, and mission logs that barely hinted at the truth. But buried in the classified layers, he found fragments, records of missions that had no explanation, success rates that defied logic, testimonies from operators who spoke in vague but reverent terms about a pilot who flew like a ghost. The deeper he read, the heavier the pit in his stomach grew. This wasn't insubordination. This wasn't recklessness. This was a woman who had chosen lives over politics, courage over caution. And for that, she had been silenced. Harris leaned back in his chair, his hands rubbing his temples. Outside his office window, the airbase bustled as though nothing had changed. But for him, everything had. Raptor Shadow wasn't just a call sign. It was a legacy. And he had just thrown it off. His base. Admiral Harris sat alone in his office long after the rest of the base had gone quiet. The hum of the air conditioning filled the silence, punctuated only by the occasional shuffle of papers as he flipped through another classified report. Desk, usually immaculate, was cluttered with folders stamped in bold red letters. Top secret. Eyes only. Each page painted a picture he did not want to believe. At first, he had searched for mistakes, anything to confirm his judgment of Captain Elise Ward as reckless, insubordinate, dangerous. He expected to find failures hidden in the classified margins, proof that the legend of Raptor Shadow was nothing more than embellished soldier talk. But the further he dug, the more the narrative shifted. Operation Iron Dagger, SEAL platoon surrounded, extraction impossible. Enemy forces triple strength, mission deemed unsalvageable by command. Ward engages against orders, clears hostile positions, extracts survivors. Operation Silent Ridge, night op compromised. SEAL team cut off. Ward intercepts insurgents on approach, eliminates threat with precision strikes. Team exfil successful. Again and again, her name surfaced. Every time attached to impossible odds and miraculous outcomes. Harris closed the last folder and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. His jaw tightened. She hadn't just broken orders. She had rewritten them. And that truth gnawed at him. The Admiral prided himself on discipline, on the belief that the chain of command was the spine of the military. Without it, chaos reigned. He had built his career on that conviction, climbing ranks by never letting personal feelings cloud his judgment. But Elise Ward, she was an anomaly. How did one measure a soldier who disobeyed direct orders, yet saved dozens of lives in the process? Was she a liability or a hero? He thought back to the hangar earlier that day. Her eyes, steady and defiant, hadn't carried arrogance. They had carried conviction. A conviction he had dismissed as dangerous, when maybe, just maybe, it was something else entirely. And then there were the SEALs, hardened warriors who answered only to respect, never to politics. He had seen them salute her without hesitation, without instruction. That wasn't protocol. That was reverence. His chest tightened as the memory replayed. The salute wasn't for Captain Elise Ward. It was for Raptor Shadow. And he, Admiral, Jonathan Harris, had thrown her off his base like a misfit. The office door creaked open. His aide, Lieutenant Daniels, stood awkwardly in the doorway, clutching another file. "Sir," Daniels said, hesitating, "I brought the transcripts. You requested. Mission debriefs. Some of them are unusual." Harris gestured for him to enter. Daniels laid the folder on the desk, his eyes flicking nervously to the chaos of papers. "You've been at this for hours," Daniels said softly. "With respect, sir, what are you looking for?" Harris didn't answer immediately. He opened the folder, scanning the typed lines, his expression hardening as he read. Finally, he muttered, almost to himself, "I'm looking for the truth." Daniels shifted uncomfortably. "About Captain Ward?" Harris's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "About Raptor Shadow." The name alone seemed to shake the lieutenant. He glanced toward the door, as though the walls themselves might be listening. "So it's true," he whispered. "She's the one." Harris studied him carefully. "You've heard the stories?" "Everyone has, sir," Daniels admitted. "They're not in the manuals, not in official records, but you hear them in the field. SEALs, Rangers, even Marines talk about her. Some say she's the reason certain units made it back at all." He paused, but I thought they were just legends. Harris leaned back, the weight of it pressing on him. Legends. That was what he had dismissed them as too. Until now. When Daniels left, Harris remained in his chair, staring at the darkened window. His reflection looked back at him, an admiral with lines of age and years of command etched into his face, but also something new doubt. He hated it. Doubt was weakness. Doubt was dangerous. Doubt got men killed. And yet, it clung to him like a shadow he couldn't shake. For the first time in his career, Harris questioned not the soldier standing before him, but himself. Had his loyalty to rules blinded him to what truly mattered? Had he punished bravery because it didn't fit the neat boxes of command? His pride wrestled with the truth. He wanted to believe he had been right, that Elise Ward was reckless, insubordinate, unfit to serve. But every report, every testimony, every salute told him otherwise. She wasn't reckless. She was fearless. She wasn't insubordinate. She was uncompromising. And unfit? No. She was exactly the kind of soldier the military needed, but the kind it didn't know how to handle. Harris rose from his chair and crossed to the window, looking out over the sleeping base. Floodlights lit the runways, casting long shadows. Across the tarmac, where only hours ago Elise Ward had stood, helmet under her arm, walking away from everything she had given her life to. The Admiral's chest tightened again. It wasn't guilt, not exactly. Guilt implied he had done something wrong knowingly. No, this was something deeper, something worse. It was realization. He had been wrong. And now, the burden of that truth was his alone to carry. That night, Harris barely slept. When dawn broke, he was already at his desk again, reading, rereading, trying to reconcile the image of Elise Ward, disgraced pilot, with Raptor Shadow, the whispered legend of the battlefield. Skies. The more he read, the clearer it became. The military had buried her story, sealed it under layers of bureaucracy and silence. They hadn't just ignored her accomplishments. They had erased them, and Harris had played right into it. When the knock came at his door, it startled him from his thoughts. "Enter," he barked. 2 SEALs stepped inside Lieutenant Mason and his second-in-command. Harris recognized them instantly from files. Survivors of Helmand. The very men she had saved. "Admiral," Mason said, his voice firm but respectful, "we heard you're asking questions about Raptor Shadow." Harris studied them, silent. Mason stepped closer, his gaze unflinching. "Sir, with respect, you need to understand something. She's not just a pilot. She's the reason men like me are standing here today. You can call her insubordinate. You can write her off on paper, but in the field, she's the one we trust when there's no one else left." The Admiral's throat tightened. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Mason's words cut deeper than any report could. When the SEALs left, Harris remained still, his hands gripping the edge of his desk. The doubt had won. For the first time in his life, Admiral Jonathan Harris wasn't sure of his own judgment. And he knew one thing with chilling certainty. If Elise Ward's story was true, then he hadn't just dismissed a pilot. He had dismissed a hero. The next morning, the airbase bustled with its usual rhythm engines roaring, boots hitting pavement, radios crackling with clipped instructions. Yet, beneath the routine, a current of anticipation hummed. Whispers traveled faster than orders. Everyone had heard fragments of what had unfolded in the hangar. The Admiral's expulsion of Captain Elise Ward, the unexpected salute from the SEALs, the quiet storm brewing behind the Admiral's office doors. By mid-morning, Admiral Harris stepped out onto the parade ground, his cap pulled low against the harsh sun. His stride was as precise as ever, yet his mind carried the weight of sleepless nights and classified reports. He had summoned a meeting, officially to address coordination between the Air Force and Navy Special Warfare units, but unofficially, he needed answers. Rows of SEALs stood in formation, their presence a wall of discipline and silent power. These were not men easily impressed, nor easily commanded outside their circle. They had fought in deserts, jungles, and mountains. They had buried brothers. They had seen legends rise and fall. And they were all waiting. Elise Ward was there too, though not in the uniform she had once worn with pride. Her helmet hung loosely in her grip, her flight suit half unzipped, as though she were already halfway. Gone. She had no orders to be here, no authority, only a shadow of belonging. Yet the SEAL's eyes tracked her, not the Admiral. Harris felt it like a knife twisting. He cleared his throat. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying across the ground, "we are gathered to reinforce cooperation between our branches. Recent events have highlighted gaps in communication, and it is my duty to ensure those gaps are closed." His words were steady, professional, but even he could hear the hollowness in them. From the back, a voice broke the silence. "With respect, sir, communication wasn't the issue." The Admiral's head snapped toward the source. Lieutenant Mason stepped forward, his jaw set, his tone controlled but resolute. He didn't ask permission to speak. SEALs didn't ask when the truth needed to be said. It wasn't comms that saved us in Helmand. It wasn't orders that pulled us out of Silent Ridge. It was her. He turned, gesturing toward Elise. Raptor Shadow. A murmur rippled through the ranks. Not disrespect, but agreement, recognition. Harris's throat tightened. He opened his mouth to reassert control, but before he could, another SEAL stepped forward. Then another, and another. One by one, they broke formation, not in defiance, but in unity, and faced Elise. Then, as though on cue, every single one of them lifted their hand in salute. The moment froze in time. The parade ground, usually filled with barked commands and rigid formality, became silent except for the rustle of uniforms as dozens of men held their salute. Their eyes were fixed on her, unwavering. Elise's grip on her helmet tightened. For a heartbeat, she seemed caught between pride and pain. She hadn't sought this. She had never wanted recognition, never needed it. Her victories were etched in survival, not ceremony. But seeing them, these warriors, men who had faced death with her in the skies above, acknowledge her openly, visibly, unashamedly, it was more than respect. It was reverence. The Admiral felt his chest constrict. He had spent his life demanding salutes. Yet here stood a woman stripped of authority, saluted not because of rank, but because of who she was. Not Captain Ward, Raptor Shadow. Stand down, Harris finally commanded, his voice rougher than intended. The SEALs did not move. Mason's voice cut through the stillness. Sir, with respect you can order us all day long, but some salutes aren't given by order, they're earned. A flicker of heat rose in Harris's chest, not anger, but something far more uncomfortable. He wanted to snap, to reassert control, but his own words failed him. The sight before him dismantled every wall of authority. He thought unshakable, because he knew Mason was right. Every salute here told a story. A mission where she had flown through fire. A night where her voice on comms meant the difference between life and death. A call sign whispered in foxholes and transports alike. Raptor Shadow. Harris's doubts, knowing and persistent, erupted into something undeniable. He had judged her by protocol. They judged her by survival. And survival carried a heavier weight than any manual. Elise finally spoke, her voice steady but quiet. That's enough. The SEALs didn't move. I said enough, she repeated, sharper this time. You don't owe me anything. Not a salute, not a word. I did my job. That's it. Her humility struck Harris as forcefully as the salutes had. She wasn't basking in the recognition. She was rejecting it, almost angry that it was given at all. But the SEALs didn't lower their hands. Mason spoke again. Ma'am, with respect, we owe you more than we can ever repay. You kept us alive when no one else could. You might not want this salute, but you've earned it. And whether the Admiral acknowledges it or not, we do. The last words hit Harris like a blow. Whether the Admiral acknowledges it or not. Silence stretched again, heavy and suffocating. Harris's gaze swept over the formation, over the unwavering salutes, over the woman at the center of it all, who neither sought nor celebrated the recognition. And in that silence, something inside him cracked. His pride, his certainty, his rigid adherence to protocol, it all crumbled against the simple, unshakable truth. Respect could not be ordered. It could only be earned. And Elise Ward had earned it 100 times over. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Harris raised his own hand. His salute was sharp, precise, deliberate. Every eye shifted to him. For the first time in his career, Admiral Jonathan Harris wasn't saluting rank. He was saluting legend. He was saluting Raptor Shadow. The SEALs lowered their hands in unison, but the weight of the moment lingered. Elise looked at the Admiral, her expression unreadable, torn between gratitude and the walls she had built from years of carrying burdens in silence. Harris lowered his hand last. The act had cost him more than any battle he had fought, but it had also freed him. He turned to the formation, his voice carrying steady this time. Gentlemen, I was wrong. The admission shocked even him, but it was the truth. I dismissed her. I dismissed what she's done for all of you, for all of us. That ends today. The SEALs remained silent, but their eyes held something Harris hadn't seen in years. approval. And Elise, though she said nothing, allowed the faintest flicker of respect to pass between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement. Later, when the crowd dispersed and the sun dipped low over the horizon, Harris lingered by the edge of the tarmac. He watched Elise preparing to leave, helmet under her arm, the shadow of her F-22 stretching long across the concrete. "Captain." "Ward," he called. She stopped but didn't turn. "I owe you more than an apology," he said quietly. "I owe you recognition, and I intend to see that you get it." For a long moment, she stood in silence. Then, without facing him, she answered, "Don't do it for me, Admiral. Do it for them." And with that, she walked away, leaving him alone with the echoes of salutes that would haunt and guide him for the rest of his life. The base felt different after the salutes. Word of the SEALs display had spread across every corridor, every hangar, every barracks room. Soldiers who once avoided Elise's gaze now looked at her with quiet curiosity, even respect. The call, signed Raptor Shadow once, whispered like a rumor now carried weight, spoken openly with a mixture of awe and defiance. But the recognition only sharpened Admiral Harris's unease. Salutes were visible. Respect was undeniable. Yet the question gnawed at him. Why had all of this been buried? Why had a pilot who saved lives been silenced? The answer, he knew, was locked behind classified files and bureaucratic walls. And he intended to tear those walls down. That evening, Harris convened a meeting in the Secure Intelligence Wing. The room was windowless, lined with screens and filing cabinets, a place where secrets lived and often died. Around the table sat Colonel Ramirez from Air Force Intelligence, Commander Blake from Naval Operations, and Director Helen Price from the Pentagon's Oversight Division, a woman known for her sharp suits and sharper words. Elise was not invited, at least not yet. "Let's get to it," Harris said, his voice clipped. "I want full disclosure on Captain Ward. Every sealed file, every redacted mission report. I don't care whose authorization it takes." Price's lips curved into a thin smile. "Admiral, you know as well as I do that some files are sealed for a reason. Digging into them will only open wounds better left closed." "Wounds?" Harris's voice hardened. "I've got SEALs saluting a pilot who was nearly court-martialed. You call that a wound?" "I call it a scandal." Blake cleared his throat. "Sir, with respect, the situation is complicated. Captain Ward's actions saved lives, yes. But she also disobeyed direct orders on multiple occasions. Higher command feared her example might encourage others to think for themselves." Harris snapped. "To value lives over protocol?" No one answered. Ramirez finally slid a folder across the table. "Admiral, you asked for the truth. Here it is." Harris opened it, eyes scanning the dense reports. Each page was worse. Then the last. Operation Silent Ridge. Initial recommendation commendation of Medal of Honor. Redacted line. Changed to official reprimand following review by Joint Command. Operation Iron Dagger. Recommendation Distinguished Flying Cross. Redacted line. Denied. Concern. Actions undermine authority of commanding officers. Harris's jaw clenched. They buried her commendations. Price leaned forward, her tone calm but sharp. They buried them because they had to. Imagine the precedent, Admiral. A pilot who openly defied orders being decorated. It would erode the chain of command across every branch. Or, Harris countered, his voice low with fury, it would remind every branch what real leadership looks like. The room went silent. Price studied him carefully, her eyes cold. "You've always been a man of order, Harris. Don't tell me you've gone soft because a group of SEALs decided to salute a myth." Harris slammed the folder shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "She's not a myth. She's the reason your precious seals are alive. And you, he pointed at Price, turned her into a liability because her courage embarrassed your system. For the first time, Price faltered. A flicker of unease crossed her face. Careful, Admiral, she warned. You tread close to insubordination yourself. Then maybe it's time someone did, Harris growled. Later that night, Harris called Elise to his office. She entered cautiously, suspicion in her eyes. She had endured too many betrayals to walk in without armor. You wanted to see me, Admiral? She asked flatly. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. Sit. She remained standing. Fine, he muttered. He slid the folder toward her. This is yours. Or at least it should have been. Elise frowned, hesitated, then opened it. Her eyes moved across the lines, her expression tightening. With every page, commendations, recommendations, awards she had never even known existed. All struck through, replaced with reprimands, denials, and bureaucratic justifications. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. I knew they didn't like me. I didn't realize they erased me. Harris leaned forward, his voice rough with regret. They didn't erase you. They couldn't. Not from the men you saved. Not from the ones who saw you in the skies when everything else was falling apart. They tried, but legends don't stay buried. For the first time, Elise's eyes softened, just a fraction. Why are you showing me this now? She asked. Because I was wrong, Harris admitted. The words tasted bitter, but necessary. I threw you off my base without knowing the truth. And now that I do, I can't ignore it. The question is, what do we do with it? Elise closed the folder and set it on his desk. We do nothing. Harris stared at her, stunned. Nothing? After all this? Her gaze was steady, unwavering. Admiral, I didn't fly those missions for medals or commendations. I did it because men were going to die if I didn't. You think a piece of paper changes that? You think it changes what we all went through? He shook his head. It changes perception. It changes history. They turned you into a cautionary tale when you should have been an example. Her voice hardened. History doesn't matter if the men lived. That's enough for me. The Admiral rose from his chair, pacing. Maybe it's enough for you, but it's not enough for me. I've built my life on enforcing the system, and for the first time I see how broken it is. If they can bury you, they can bury anyone. He turned to face her. If the truth stays hidden, then the system wins. And we both know the system doesn't deserve to. Elise studied him, searching his face for signs of insincerity. Finally, she exhaled. You really mean that? She said softly. I do, Harris replied. For the first time, there was no admiral and no disgraced pilot. There were only two. Soldiers, bound by the same war, the same truths, the same scars. The following day, Harris filed an official petition to reopen Elise Ward's record. It was a bold move, one that risked his career and reputation. The Pentagon bristled, Director Price threatened, and whispers of insubordination swirled. But Harris didn't care, because when he looked at Elise Ward, he no longer saw a liability. He saw the truth, and the truth was worth fighting for. The air on the tarmac was crisp with morning chill, a stark contrast to the heat of recent days. Rows of jets gleamed under the early sunlight, their metal skins catching the light in sharp flashes, a reminder of the power and precision housed within the base. Today, however, the aircraft were secondary. The eyes of every soldier, every airman, every SEAL present were fixed on a single figure, Captain Elise Ward. Admiral Harris arrived first, walking with a sense of urgency that betrayed both his respect for protocol and the rebellion in his heart. In his pocket lay the official reinstatement paper, sealed, stamped, and signed despite bureaucratic resistance, from multiple Pentagon offices. Each signature carried a silent defiance, a recognition that the system had been wrong. And for the first time in years, Harris felt that same defiance belonged not to him, but to someone else. Elise Ward stood at attention in front of the assembled troops, her helmet tucked under her arm. She had requested no ceremony, no fanfare. She did not seek glory. Yet the tension in the air, the quiet hum of anticipation, made it clear that this would be a day none present would forget. The SEALs were already in formation, faces stoic, hands resting lightly on rifles as they waited. Their silent presence spoke more than words ever could. They didn't salute yet. This moment, they knew, belonged to her, and they waited for her to decide how she would receive it. Harris approached, holding the papers like a bridge between apology and justice. "Captain Ward," he called, his voice steady, yet carrying the weight of days filled with doubt and reflection. "You are hereby reinstated to full duty, effective immediately. All previous reprimands related to battlefield decisions are rescinded, and your commendations are restored." Elise's eyes narrowed as she processed the words. Silence stretched across the tarmac. The gathered troops waited, the hum of anticipation almost unbearable. "Admiral," she said finally, her voice low, "you don't have to do this in front of them." Harris met her gaze evenly. "No, I do. You earned this, and they need to see it. They need to understand what the system tried to erase and what cannot be erased." Slowly, Elise exhaled, her posture relaxing slightly. She took the papers, scanning the official seals and signatures. Her lips pressed into a thin line, betraying the storm of emotions: relief, vindication, anger, and something softer: acknowledgement. The SEALs broke formation in unison, a ripple of movement that drew every eye. Their salutes rose sharply, perfectly synchronized, like a living echo of every mission where she had kept them alive. The sound of boots and hands striking in disciplined reverence carried across the tarmac, a rhythm that was almost ceremonial, almost sacred. Elise looked at them, the weight of their respect pressing down, and for a fleeting moment she felt the isolation of years in silence begin to lift. Harris stepped closer. "Captain Ward," he said again, quieter this time, "there are still bureaucrats who'll question your methods. There are still commanders who'll resist this decision. But know this: what you did and what you continue to do cannot be undone. You are one of the finest pilots I have ever had the honor to command, and today the record reflects it." Elise's voice, when she spoke, carried a mixture of humility and restrained strength. "I didn't fly for medals or recognition. I flew to keep my people alive. That hasn't changed." Harris nodded, understanding, and it never should. As the formal reinstatement concluded, a low rumble of engines broke the tension. Above the horizon, a formation of F-22s appeared, slicing through the morning sky with precision. It was a squadron Elise had once commanded, now flying as a tribute, their aerial movements sharp and deliberate. Each loop and roll mirrored the missions she had flown: chaotic, dangerous, yet controlled. The SEALs saluted again, this time not just as a gesture of respect, but as an acknowledgement of shared history, of battles fought together, of lives saved. Elise's gaze followed the jets as they passed overhead, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself a faint smile. A smile not of triumph, but of quiet satisfaction. The men who mattered most had acknowledged her. The system had tried to erase her, but it had failed. Later, in the briefing room, Harris gathered the SEAL commanders and senior Air Force officers for a closed discussion. Elise was present, her presence commanding respect without demanding it. The conversation was tense, focused, a delicate balance of military protocol and moral reckoning. Harris addressed the room. "Captain Ward's actions have already saved countless lives. Her judgment, often questioned by protocol, has proven sound under fire. Going forward, I will not tolerate any attempts to dismiss or undermine her authority. In the field, her experience, her instincts, and her courage are assets. Period. A murmur of agreement passed through the room. Some officers nodded reluctantly, others with evident respect. For Harris, it was a small victory, but a crucial one. The system, though slow and resistant, could be guided toward justice if leaders were willing to challenge its flaws. Elise remained quiet, listening, assessing as always. She had learned long ago that recognition often carried hidden costs. But here, she saw the subtle shift. Acknowledgement that wasn't forced, that wasn't performative. It was genuine, rooted in truth. Mason leaned slightly toward her. "Didn't think I'd see the day?" he murmured. She smirked faintly. "Neither did I." The bond between them, forged in fire and survival, remained unbroken. In the days following her reinstatement, word spread beyond the base. Pentagon officials murmured about the rare reversal of protocol. Analysts discussed the implications of honoring field judgment over bureaucratic rigidity. The story of Raptor Shadow became a quiet legend in military circles, a reminder that courage and instinct could not be measured solely by paperwork or orders. Elise resumed her duties, stepping back into the cockpit of her F-22 with a calm precision that belied the storm of recognition surrounding her. Every maneuver, every loop, every tactical decision reaffirmed why she had earned her place, not through politics, not through rank, but through skill, bravery, and unflinching commitment to the lives of others. And though she remained humble, she no longer carried the weight of erasure. Her legacy had been restored, visible not only on paper, but in the eyes of those who had lived because of her. Harris watched her from the edge of the tarmac, a quiet sense of pride mingling with lingering guilt. He had been wrong. He had underestimated her. And now, through her reinstatement, through the respect of the SEALs, and through her undeniable skill, the truth was undeniable. Admiral Harris had learned the lesson that no briefing, no manual, and no protocol could teach. Authority must be tempered with wisdom, and recognition must honor truth. And in that lesson, Elise Ward, Raptor Shadow, stood at the center, a living testament to courage beyond orders, loyalty beyond politics, and a legacy that could not and would not be silenced. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the last F-22s roared past, leaving trails of vapor in the pink and orange sky. Elise stood on the tarmac, helmet under her arm, watching as the planes vanished into the distance. Behind her, the SEALs and Air Force pilots acknowledged her with subtle nods and quiet murmurs, gestures that spoke more than ceremonies ever could. She finally allowed herself a deep breath. The war, the missions, the politics, they had all tested her. But now, standing in the open air, surrounded by those who recognized the truth, she felt a rare sense of closure. Not glory, not accolades, but acknowledgement. And that, she knew, was enough. The runway stretched endlessly into the horizon, metal glinting in the early morning sun. Captain Elise Ward adjusted her helmet straps with precise fingers, her palms steady despite the hum of anticipation in her chest. Today was more than another training sortie. It was a symbolic mission, a flight that marked her reinstatement, her acknowledgement, and her reclamation of a legacy that had been buried for far too long. The SEALs stood at the perimeter, as they had so many times before, their presence a silent reassurance. Lieutenant Mason gave a small nod, the familiar combination of respect and brotherhood passing between them. It was more than tradition. It was trust. And today, the trust felt heavier than any combat mission they had faced together. Admiral Harris watched from the control tower, binoculars in hand. The weight of the past weeks pressed on him, a mixture of guilt, relief, and admiration. The bureaucratic battles had been won, Elise's reputation restored. But this flight, he knew, was personal for her, and for the men who had lived because of her. Ready, Raptor Shadow? Mason's voice crackled over the secure combs. Elise's lips curved into a faint smile beneath her visor. Always, she replied, her voice calm, unwavering. The engines roared to life, shaking the tarmac with a familiar intensity. Elise's F-22 taxied forward with precision, the sun catching the polished wings and reflecting her journey a story of courage, defiance, and unyielding skill. As she ascended, the base receded, the mountains and desert spreading beneath her like a vast, open canvas. She felt the familiar rush of altitude, the rush of wind, and the hum of engines beneath her. Each maneuver was a memory, each loop a reminder of past battles. Helmand Province, the ridges, the ambushes, the cries over combs, they all echoed in her mind. But there was no fear today. Only clarity, only purpose. Overhead, a squadron of jets mirrored her formation, performing the aerial choreography she had once commanded. Every twist, every turn, every sharp roll was a tribute and nod to missions that had almost claimed lives, but hadn't, because she had been there. And she had survived. The radio crackled to life, Admiral Harris's voice calm, but tinged with emotion. Ward, the skies are yours. Show them why we fight. Elise adjusted her throttle, her focus absolute. With a sudden burst, she banked, sharply, rolling into a complex maneuver that pushed her jet to the edge of its limits. The SEALs on the ground shielded their eyes against the glinting sun and the reflective metal, all evident on every face. This wasn't a display of arrogance, it was a demonstration of mastery, of experience, of someone who had flown through fire and lived to tell the tale. A formation loop brought her F-22 overhead the parade ground. She glanced down at the assembled troops below. Salutes rose, synchronized and sharp. It wasn't protocol. They were honoring her, yes, but it was personal, a shared acknowledgement that transcended orders, paperwork, or rank. For a fleeting moment, time slowed. The dust rose from the tarmac. The wind whipped against uniforms, and the sun painted every surface gold. And in that moment, Captain Elise Ward was no longer just a pilot, no longer just Raptor Shadow. She was every life she had saved, every mission she had flown, every risk she had taken that others couldn't or wouldn't. The mission plan was simple on paper: high-altitude flight, precision maneuvers, and a return to base. But for Elise, it was a test of legacy. Each turn, each barrel roll, each vertical ascent reminded her why she flew: to protect, to serve, and to inspire. The weight of recognition sat lightly now, not a burden, but a responsibility. "Admiral," she murmured over comms, "I feel their eyes on me." "They're not watching the jet," Harris replied, voice low and steady. "They're watching you." The realization brought a rare smile beneath her visor. She was no longer flying alone. She never had been, not truly. The SEALs, the Air Force pilots, even Harris himself, they were all part of the story she had written in the skies. Suddenly, her instruments detected a simulated threat, a reminder that even symbolic flights demanded skill and vigilance. A mock target appeared on the radar, designed to test precision and response. Elise Dove, executing a series of rapid maneuvers, neutralizing the target with perfect timing. The F-22 responded flawlessly, a testament to both technology and her mastery. On the ground, SEALs and Air Force personnel watched, some whispering, some silent, all captivated. Lieutenant Mason shook his head in disbelief, muttering, "Every time she just never fails." Harris felt the sting of humility in his chest. He had doubted her, dismissed her, and yet here she was alive, triumphant and undeniable. The weight of the past weeks, of the bureaucratic battles and silenced commendations, evaporated in the face of this flight. Elise climbed higher, breaking through the clouds. The wind rushed past, the sun glinting off her canopy. She felt an overwhelming clarity. She had fought battles in the skies, battles on the ground, and battles against bureaucracy. And now, standing in the thin blue air above the world, she could see the full picture. As she leveled off, Harris spoke again. "Captain Ward, it's time for the final maneuver. Do it for them. Do it for yourself." Her fingers tightened on the controls. She rolled the jet sharply, then banked into a perfect loop. Another roll, faster, sharper, more precise. The formation mirrored her, a symphony of metal and skill. And then, as the sun reached its zenith, she executed a vertical climb, disappearing into the clouds for a heartbeat, before plummeting back down in a controlled dive. The ground erupted in applause, not just protocol, not just training response, but raw, unrestrained acknowledgement. Soldiers and SEALs alike raised their hands. Salutes, fists, and cheers, the noise echoing across the tarmac and into the desert beyond. Elise broke formation and landed gracefully on the runway, the jet's brakes screeching lightly as it came to a halt. Smoke and heat mingled in the air, a haze that seemed to mark the completion of something far greater than a flight. She climbed out, helmet under her arm, and the SEALs rushed forward not as a formation, but individually, each shaking her hand, clapping her shoulder, offering the simple words, "Thank you. You saved us, Raptor Shadow." Harris descended the tower stairs, slower than usual, his eyes on her. He had seen many ceremonies, many commendations, many missions. None of them had carried the weight of this moment. He stopped before her, finally allowing himself to speak. The words he had withheld for so long. "Captain Ward, no. Raptor Shadow, you were right. Always." Elise studied him, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then, with a faint nod, she accepted the words not as forgiveness, but as acknowledgement. "Let's go home," she said simply, and for the first time, she meant it not as a mission, but as a conclusion to a chapter that had taken years to reclaim. In the days following, her reinstatement became permanent. Commemorative articles, official citations, and internal records reflected the truth at last. Raptor Shadow was no longer a whispered myth. She was a living legend, a symbol of courage. That transcended orders and bureaucracy. The SEALs remained loyal, always watching, always remembering. And Admiral Harris, once a man of unyielding protocol, had learned a lesson that no report or manual could ever teach. Sometimes respect, recognition, and justice come from courage, not compliance. Elise returned to the skies frequently, but never alone. Mason and his team often accompanied her on training missions, a reminder that the bonds formed in fire could not be broken by politics. She flew not for medals, not for fame, but because it was who she was, and because the lives she had saved depended on pilots who dared to act when others hesitated. On the final day of her reinstatement ceremony, Harris watched her jet disappear into the horizon, the contrail stretching long and silver across the morning sky. For the first time in years, he smiled without reservation. The system had been wrong. He had been wrong. But the sky, as always, told the truth. And Captain Elise Ward Raptor Shadow had always been right there, cutting through it with fearless precision. The legend had returned. The system could no longer silence her. The SEALs, the Air Force, and even the Admiral knew one undeniable fact. She was and always would be the shadow in the sky, the guardian in the storm, and the pilot who refused to be erased. And as the sun dipped low, painting the runway gold, she knew her final flight was not an end, but a legacy that would endure for generations.